Welcome. Everybody excited to see what people came up with today? Yeah? We had close to 200 people here all day, which is a fantastic turnout. This is our, I think, fourth National Day of Civic Hacking, and this is definitely the largest one that we've had so far. And so, at least for this, yeah. And for a data jam, and I just want to say thank you for making it through to the very end. So now we're going to get into the summary presentation, and before doing that, I just want to give a huge shout out to the ops team, particularly Jen. As soon as that woman in white with red hair, when she gets in here, as soon as we walk in, we're just going to stop and clap, because she's been producing this event, and she's been spending many late nights making sure that we all have all the things that we had today. And then give a huge shout out to all of the volunteers. Thank you for slaving away all day. And now what we're going to do as the closing is each challenge group is going to come up. They're going to present some slides, and we're going to receive some color commentary from two esteemed civic hackers themselves. So the first one is going to be Deputy Borough President Aldrin. He currently is the Deputy Borough President and formerly the Director of CUNY in the Heights. Mr. Bonilla has a reputation of being a straight shooter, social entrepreneur, and technology visionary. I wrote this, by the way. So the Deputy Borough President's duty is to oversee all units of operations related to constituent affairs and lead initiatives to improve the quality of life, support community boards, encourage the use of technology, deliver efficient services, and offer civic engagement. And it's been a great pleasure to work with Aldrin as an advisor and a mentor. If it wasn't for his focus on products for impact, we wouldn't have had BoardStat, and I want to thank him and ask him to come up and just say a few words about his impression for the day.
Thank you, Noel. How's everybody doing? It's like brains like right. It was an amazing opportunity to see all the different work that the different groups were doing and the different people involved in the classes. How many community board members are still here? If you could please stand. If you could please stand. Thank you for the community board members to offer your insight. I know Mary's in the back. This is, as you all know, very important to the office of the borough president. We really are committed to making sure, that this makes its way to community boards and then to the community education councils, to the Solid Waste Advisory Board, which is Manhattan's premier environmental board. We think that is very important for decision making. And this is important in the sense that, you know, we can't lose track that at the end of all these numbers, or part of all these numbers, is the human experience, right? It's really about how do we transform and change lives? How do we make sure that equity is realized? How do we make sure that people's rights are enforced? So one way to look at this is, recently, this week you might have heard a lot about the name Steve Krollman. Anybody's heard that name, Steve Krollman? Yes, yeah, some people are booing. So Steve Krollman is probably, you know, a great driver in a lot of these 311 complaints, and you may not even know that, right? Because you may know DOB violations, so you think the building gets violations, right? So it's like, oh, the building has 3,000 violations. So that desensitizes you a little bit. But if the building has human beings living in it, or children living in it, then when you have hot water complaints, or no hot water in the winter, or no heat, or asbestos, right? And then if you have a child with asthma, and then if you have poor educational outcomes, right? That's all integrated. Well, Steve Krollman is notorious for being a big slumlord. And he just, on Tuesday, was able, his lawyer, Benjamin Braffman, who's a famous lawyer to the stars, was able to get the judge to not let him start jail time on Tuesday because of the high holy days that he needs to observe. So he'll start jail later. but he has 20 felony counts, of which he just got convicted for 3 of them. But just like Al Capone, who's really just, he was not that bad of a guy in the sense that he was just a tax evader, right? He just evaded, he got in trouble for evading taxes, right? Not the other stuff. But this guy got in trouble for lying about his rent-stabilized units and all the units that taxpayers had paid for already in advance to be affordable units. He made the market rate, right? But, so that's what he'll do. He's supposed to be doing, he could do up to 25 years in jail, but he'll only do 1 year in jail, and he'll do it after the high holy days. But when you really peel it back, and I know many of you have been working on the 311 data, and it's 13 million complaints since 2010, and then, but that's human beings, right? But then you peel it back, and in some category, it's about housing, right? And when you think that this person owns so many buildings that pretty much tortured their residents, the human beings that live there, and that was a driver of much of this data that we just put into columns and rows and have charts and histograms and then decide what color we want that to be. But to think that this person, it was responsible for that kind of torment and those kind of human rights violations, that kind of human dignity violations, really puts this in perspective of what we really need this data to like scream out to have us do, right? Like what can, once we squeeze it all out, and I know in some areas you talked about early warning signs and predictive nature of this and insight, but you know, how can we really make this speak to improving the human condition? And at the end of the day, how can we really remember that there's people's lives at the end of this data or that's part of this data when we either aggregate it up or disaggregate it down or sort it or get a frequency that is really humans behind this. So it's really important the work that you're doing, and we hope that if it's done right, if it's done thoughtfully, if we stay on task and keep the commitment, that in time this can really help community boards, which are groups of 50 volunteers throughout New York City's 59 community boards, doing Herculean work on stuff that doesn't get talked about, but is really important. And we hope that it can help in their decision making. And as I said in one group, there's many ways to chop up the data to be useful, but if we think about it in terms of the decision making nodes, it's really about community board work being about hindsight, oversight, and foresight. So hindsight in terms of whatever fatalities at an intersection, okay, well, that happened, you know, but then what's the oversight? Which agency, how effective, how efficient, how accountable? But really, once we get those two things working well, community board members and residents and all of us are really thirsty for the foresight in terms of the vision and the strategic planning around how can we get ahead of some of this, and what might predict or what might it tell about the human condition and what people, how they're living into the future. And this is where we're really excited about the promise of the work that you guys are doing here. So I'm very excited to hear about the conclusion of the many challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, buddy. And now, for our next color commentary is Joe, and tell me how to pronounce your last name. Marceau, the executive director of NYC 311. And Joe, how long have you been with 311 for? 11 years, working in government, hearing all of our complaints all the time. 50. He started when he was 15. He was like physically connecting the telephone lines so that way New Yorkers could complain. Joe is a veteran of the consumer marketing and contact center operations industry. And what I will tell you the story is when I first met him, all I saw was this really excited and happy individual to talk to someone who was a geek about municipal problems. And he was just like, what do you want to do? Let's do it. I can't do it, but I want to hear what you want to do with it. And several years later, we're glad to see that 311 is being redesigned, and we're glad that Joe is at the helm, and that we're going to get an API, a read-write API eventually. we'll be able to, automatically process a lot more data. So I'm going to ask Joe to come up here and to give a few words of the day. Maybe if you come this way, as Jolly, yeah, Joe. Okay.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Noel, and thank you, everyone else. I'll echo what you said earlier. Kudos and compliments to everyone who's put this together. This is quite impressive to start with. So I want to do a few things. First, I appreciate the intro. I do feel like I'm the luckiest person in New York City because I think I have the best job in New York City. I get to work with colleagues every day who truly care about what we call the customer, but I'm going to steal Aldrin's word and use humans. Right? One of the things I'd like to do is share with you a little bit of how 311 operates, and I'm very glad you shared that term and you focused on that, because that, I think, is one of the things that makes the folks who work at 311 and others who give their time and energy to civic causes, like all of you, which really separates us. We're looking at people. We're looking at humans. So if you allow me to share a little bit about 311, as I said, I get to work with folks every day who are committed to serving their fellow New Yorkers. Not many people in the city get to sign up for that. People on our team, like Chenda and Magdalene, somewhere here, there she is. People in other parts of the city government, Tina and the team from operations, folks from MODA, folks from MOTI. We got a lot of acronyms. I won't go through all of them. Folks from other agencies. And it really is terrific. We work with a number of other groups, the community boards. I saw Susan here somewhere. There she is, hiding. We get to work with Aldrin and team, and of course with the great Gail Brewer, who I know was here earlier today. And all of that works well together, because the folks I just mentioned and everyone in that part of that group, they really believe that they're adding value and that their work does make a difference. And just by way of example, for a small group at 311, on a given day, they may just make life a little easier for someone by explaining some obscure regulation, and it may have nothing to do more than garbage and recycling collection. But for that person in that moment, it's important. And for those people, a lot of other times, it's far more than that. Right? They're actually helping someone find something that's going to help them with their lives. They're actually connecting a domestic violence victim with a potential solution. So caring about people goes a long way. Having a government, having an administration that supports that is terrific. The team at 311 really believes in the value of customer service, of public service, and civic responsibility. And why I'm thrilled to be here is this community shares that belief, and you share that same commitment. It's evident. You all do the same. You give your time and your talent and your skills to make New York a little bit easier, a little bit better, and sometimes a lot better for the people that you serve. So I'm very excited to see what comes out of today, how that applies. The idea of going from starting this morning and presenting this afternoon is a little bit overwhelming for a government guy. You get to do something in one day. Wow. I'm still looking around for like the procurement officers, the legal team, all the no's. They're good. But so I am looking forward to that. And just in kind of wrapping here, my team knows this. I've said this many times. One of the things I've really tried to push in my 11 years of being at 311 is really to think about our customer. Again, whether you think about it as a human, someone living in a home, someone in need of help, whatever they need. We want to remove the burden from the customer and put that on the city to deliver. Too often, certainly before 311 started, that was the case, right? The burden was on the customer. It still is in too many cases. We've come a long way. But one of the things we're doing, working with the open data community, is just that, finding new ways to get beyond the fact that we have a 15-year-old system and we can't do something. But you can do that. You can hear the situations, you can take the data, you can come up with something we can't even imagine or we don't even think of. And that is going to help remove that burden from the customer, to go back to what I said earlier, making life a little easier for New York City customers and New York City public. So I'm really anxious to see this work today. I'm really anxious to see how it's going to help our customers. And I really, really want to thank you all for the work that you do, and I feel like you're an extension of what we do. And for that, thank you for the partnership. So congratulations, give yourselves all a hand.
Thank you, Joe. Jolly, do you want to come do some tech support? Okay, great. While Jolly's doing some tech support, I want to ask Jen and Lauren to come up here real quickly. These are the two people. Where'd Lauren? Come up here. And let's give a round of applause for Jen and Lauren. Jen has done all the hard work making sure that we were fed and that we're on time and that all the volunteers were coordinated on top of all of the other ops team and making sure that we were all in place. And this is the wonderful designer of our lovely logo. So, and I just wanted to give thank you to both of you, and thank you to all of the other volunteers that have spent some time dedicating Christian, Alex, Farheen, where are you? Yeah, they're all over here. All these people in the white shirts. So, great, thank you. All right, does anybody who attended one of the classes want to talk about their experience and what they thought was really interesting? No? No, you do? Yeah, yeah, you want to come up here? We can do a big step or a little step. What would you like to do? All right, there we go.
I have enough ham that in my personality that I wear mustard as perfume. My name is Mary O Shaughnessy. I am the IT director for Her Justice. We are a legal services organization in New York City that provides civil legal help to low-income New York City women. Primarily, they are domestic violence survivors. 70% are immigrants. Many are out of status. We have 22 DACA clients right now. I came here to find out more about how we can report to our funders and the public about what we do. Also, Friday night, I found out that I am the newest member of Community Board 12. I want to give a shout out to the dashboard, the Power BI. Brianna was an amazing instructor. I learned a ton. I got 3 things that will cut hours off my day. Thank you, everybody who made this possible.
Thank you. There's steps that way. To any of the other, Jolly, how we doing?
I'm just not getting a direct feed from the slides, but I can shoot them off the screen.
Yeah? Okay. Bless you. Do you want me to? All right. Well, short of rebooting the whole house. Does anybody who attended any of the other classes want to talk about the work that they did and things that they found interesting? Yeah? Do you want to come up here? You want to take a big step? All right.
Hi, my name is April Joyner. I'm a freelance journalist, and I was in the Data NYC class that was taught by Emily, and it was wonderful. I had some experience, but like just getting around the open data portal and showing us like basically how to move around in it, find relevant data sets. We learned Socrata. We learned how to make charts. We use Carto in QGIS, so we were exposed to a lot of new tools. And one thing I found interesting is we had a discussion about what data shows and what it doesn't, its biases and ways that it can be used to improve our communities. So I appreciated that discussion.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Cool. Does the third class want to represent? No? Richard, do you want to come up and talk really briefly what you guys did? Okay. Just so that everybody has an understanding. No one's left out.
So in their defense, it was the advanced spreadsheets class, and I think by the end of it, they were just like, the data-ness was just too much for them. No, so we started off talking about what is data, what is analysis, why is it important, kind of orient them to the analysis, and then we started with the open data portal and downloaded data into some basic analysis, and then started comparing data sets. So questions we looked at were, how does like the number of noise-related service requests by population in a community district be able to compare large or populous community districts with not so populous community districts? And then we looked at the average time that a 311 complaint stays open. So, looking at the time difference between the closed closed date and the open date. And then our kind of like peak capstone there was actually comparing this by median household income. So actually look at whether the time to stay open related at all to the median household income for a particular community district. So it was a fun little exercise, and the result is inconclusive. Right? I actually just tweeted out. Really, this is a process exercise we're going through, and we identified some issues with the data that some are within 301's control, some are not. And I'm sure many that they're aware of. Well, now it's tweeted out anyway. But it raises awareness about the kind of the challenges working with open data, but also some of the opportunities. We had someone who was actually from a community board in there, who was a ringer for the group she was working with, because of course she knew a lot about the issues and the concerns. It was really great getting that perspective on things. And I think she learned just as much, even though she didn't have a laptop, wasn't able to kind of follow along with everything, as the people who were like flying and whizzing through the Excel part. So it was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Richard. All right. Jolly, you still getting these slides? All right. Sorry for having a... All right. So what is an ideal future of the NYC service request data and its open data schema? What is an ideal future of NYC 311 service request data and its open data schema? That's what I wanted to say. Huh? Yeah. So we're going to have Sarah and Ben come up and go through some 5 slides. So can I get Sarah and Ben to come up here?
Okay, yeah. So we were looking at the future of the open data portal. And so we started by looking at kind of who is using this and the way in which they're using it, and came up with 3 personas that really captured the vast majority of use cases. So we have New Yorkers, who are the customer, city workers, who are working with the agencies that are part of 311, and then data scientists, who are looking at the data collected through the portal. Our one condition when looking at all of this is that customer service is king, as has been talked about. I swear this was added before both of you guys talked about this. So with these 3 lenses, we looked at this, and our takeaways were general themes and then recommendations, as opposed to a prototype, because that's already underway. So
our first group was brainstorming from the perspective of New Yorkers, which was easy because they were New Yorkers. And the ideas that they came up with, they thought that it was really important from the very beginning to make clear the focus on privacy, that folks who are making requests through 311 know that their personally identifiable information is not going to be exposed in any way. And I think we all know that working with the data, but it still has to be very clear to the user of the system that that's true. There was a lot of discussion of for the users, for folks who are making requests, and we should be clear that we were talking about specifically the service request data through 311. I'm not sure if that's true for all the other groups, but we were really focusing in on actionable service requests that get sent to the agencies. That the granularity of updates on the request that's made is really important. So not just getting an update when whatever the condition that you made the request about has actually been addressed, but maybe getting some updates throughout the process of what's happening and what any steps that have been taken towards addressing the condition. A third factor that was important to this group was being clear about the context of requests. So first of all, helping guide them to understand what requests actually are actionable by the City of New York, what requests can make it through and actually get sent to an agency to be acted on, which is a big focus of this component of the 311 system. And then also maybe creating some tools that let folks see whether there have been similar other requests made recently in their geography, or if the condition that they're talking about is something that has been there for a while, or that kind of thing, which is data that maybe could be vended back out from the 311 system at the time that people are making their requests. And then a lot of discussion around managing expectations of the users in terms of what should they expect once they've made a request through the 311 system. And this led to we're going to make one recommendation from each group, and this led to our recommendation from the New Yorker group, which is really thinking about how they come out of the request process in terms of their expectations around timing of when they should see the thing that they're making a request about be addressed. Currently, there is a timing expectation that's communicated to the user, and that's based on the service level agreements that the agencies make with the mayor's office, I think is how I understand it. And so sometimes those timing expectations are set up so that the agencies are very sure that they're going to be able to get a good score on the service level agreements, and not necessarily optimistically so that the consumer or the customer sees a time frame that they're excited about hearing. So they might see a very pessimistic estimate, which is good for the agency because they look good on their performance metrics, but not so good for the customer who gets pretty grumpy when they first make the request. So we were thinking about that there might be some way to do some A/B testing, doing the traditional way that it's been done, but also since we know on each request type how long it has actually taken the agency in the past to address these requests, that you might be able to see what happens if you vend that information to the customer instead and see whether it might take longer than that historical mean, but maybe they'd like to see that more than see a sort of like the longest possible time. So that's one recommendation from this group. So the next group of stakeholders was the city workers who are responding to these requests, folks in the agencies. And the group that was imagining themselves to be city workers, which one of whom was a city worker, the first thing that they thought was really important was that the data system, and it really does a good job of doing that, respects existing agency processes so that the requests that are coming in framed in a way that they are really asking for agencies to do things that they can do, and that they understand the phrasing and the categories of the requests so that there's something that they can act on immediately. And so that's something that it does a good job of. That's a constraint for the data system that it has to adjust to each of these internal agency data systems as well, but it's really important to actually get the work done. It's also important for city workers to have the data system allow them to showcase their successes. So as we're thinking about timing and how long it takes to get things done and what rate of successes we have, making sure that the agencies get credit for the work that they're doing. And thinking through how the 311 data can be used by agencies for strategic planning. We had a lot of discussion and conversation about the kinds of data that shows up in 311 and how that could identify geographies and areas of issues that are new that are arising, and ways to think about sort of both responding to immediate new concerns, but also longer-term chronic concerns. So ways to sort of incorporate the data that you're getting from 311 into the agencies and their planning for how they're going to budget and focus their work. And sort of tied into that, it felt to us like because you're getting this consistent data from 311 across more than 100 city agencies, that the agencies could really learn from the ways that the different agencies are using the 311 data, both just what kinds of requests are coming into the system and getting vended to another agency, but in the same geography that you're seeing. So if you're the police department and you want to see, you could see what kinds of requests are coming into HPD in the same set of blocks that you're seeing requests for the police department. So being able to sort of look at the actual service requests overlaid across agencies, but also having the agencies be able to learn from each other about the best practices for interacting with the 311 data and responding to it in the ways that they they use this tool to get their work done. So that was that, and now one more group. Oh, no, you've got.
Yeah, so data scientist was the last group that we looked at, and so feeding the hunger was really the biggest thing that came out. So always, data scientists, always we want more data to work with, we want more fields in the data to play around with, and more documentation. That was one of the things that we picked out there. Now that has to be balanced with the privacy and not collecting more data than is actually necessary from New Yorkers, from the customers, but still trying to do that in a way that allows for more meaningful insights. Sampling bias we touched on very briefly, but didn't spend a whole lot of time on, as there's a whole other group that was looking at that specifically, so I'm sure that they will touch on that and 4 groups from now. And then capturing contextual data was something that came up kind of across all 3 of these personas, which are kind of our big recommendation from this group was using AI, as the switch happens over to IBM and Microsoft taking care of this, using some of their AI tools that they already have to take some of the the text data that's submitted along with a request or photo data or something like that, and to provide more context about that service request, and creating kind of a labeling or tagging system on top of that that then can be used for correlating or identifying trends across different data sets, across different agencies. And this was something that came up for all 3 personas as identifying trends and kind of having this, I guess, metadata set on top of just the requests. Yeah.
Yep, this one works. And now for the color commentary.
No, I thought it was great. In terms of the recommendations, how does that fit into the future of how you want to see 311 service?
That's
The
a
future part of the question.
great question. So we were, in our group, we had folks from the 311 and also folks from IBM who are working on the next generation, next iteration of this. And they were really pleased, particularly in the ideas that we had from the New Yorker's perspective, because they felt like a lot of those were things that have actually, that they've been thinking a lot about as they're designing the new system. So it sounds like there's some new tools for intermediate updates as a service request is being worked on. There's some tools for the agencies to work through how to update the requester. And then, I mean, you can speak to the data scientists, but I felt like there was just a lot of energy around thinking through what we learned through the whole process of somebody working with 311. So not just about the actual requests that get made, but the kinds of things that we're not capturing because they're not actionable requests that can go to agencies yet, but that are things that people are asking about and interested in. And those are kind of getting lost in the process now because there's a real focus on moving things to the agencies and getting stuff done, but there are lots of people that have questions and things that can't be acted on right now, and we felt like this was a time when the technology might exist to learn more about those kinds of requests.
So first off, great job, and I love the first piece with customer service is king, and you also put a trademark on that, so I guess I'm going to have to do that in the future now too. And then at the end here, you're using the term I used earlier, right? Remove the burden from the customer. So great to have that mindset there. I'd go back to the first role of New Yorkers and some of the comments that you had there, in particular, setting the expectation around SLAs. So I know the women and men who man the front lines at 311 would very much be interested in understanding a little bit more about that and be able to provide the optimum SLA to the public, since they're the ones who bear the brunt of an SLA that is generous, let's say, as opposed to a more closer to the operating performance. So that's terrific. What I'd be interested in, and not necessarily to go into detail, but I'd be curious to follow up on is when it talked about getting updates along the way, essentially, was there any discussion as to the level that you're looking for? Is it, the FedEx level, the truck has started, the truck has left the garage, the truck has taken a right turn on, 4th Avenue here? Or is it more, tell me meaningful milestones along the way? Again, if you want to comment on that now, I don't need a deep dive, but I am very curious because it's an opportunity for us to work that as Chenda and her team are working on our new CRM.
Yeah, that we discussed that a lot, and there was different opinions in the group, and I think you would probably find, that would be really interesting to do some data collection on and learn about, because some people were like, yes, I want to know everything. It makes me feel like somebody is paying attention to it, and it's interesting, like, what are the steps? I want to learn. And some people were like, don't send me a million emails when none of those emails is, I fixed your problem. So, yeah, I feel like there's going to be differences of opinion, and I don't know. And there was this suggestion of, setting the level of verbosity, which is like a command line reference. But yeah, so yeah, we talked about it, but we didn't have an answer for you.
I appreciate it. I mean, you've really captured the spectrum, and again, I think you nailed we think of the users the same way you identified the universe, right? It's the customer, it's the New Yorker, it's the city workers, the city agencies, the community boards who rely on that, and then it's the data scientists, because this is where it's meaningful. So great job just in kind of strata that along that way. So terrific, good work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up, as I double microphone this. All right, we've got challenge number 2. Paul and Shannon are going to come up here, and let's see if I can get these two things going. What features and insights can be built into board stat improvements? Let's have some other colorful commentary. Who's dashboard planning? All right.
So these are our beautiful community boards all working together. So here's an example of, it's a screenshot from the existing amazing new community profile dashboard that is from NYC Planning. And our mandate was to figure out how we might layer in 311 data with the goal of being as useful as possible to the community board members who will be viewing it. So there's goal number 1. We were lucky enough to have 2 community board members on our team from 2 different community boards, and we got to talk with them about how they would use 311 data if it were as clear and simple as it is.
Let's try this other one.
Sorry, abusive, I guess, I don't know. So the goal was to really make it useful, and we thought that by staying high level, really helping them to make choices about where they could go for more detail would be really powerful for them. To keep it simple in terms of interactivity, making sure it's easy to use and easy to read, and as well as simplifying the data a little bit. So part of our group spent a lot of time looking at what kind of roll-ups would make sense. So there's a lot of different types of 311 requests, like what categories, larger categories make sense to look at. So we'll show those categories. And also we decided that 3 types of visualizations were going to be most useful for the community board members. Geo visualizations, where are these requests coming from? Time series visualizations to look at, to have selections about which time ranges to view, but also to compare time ranges over past time ranges, and to also tie the request to agency performance, because this piece really gives community boards power. It's not just about knowing what's going on in their district, but it's what can the community board do about it, and having the requests tied to the agencies that the request could be solved by really helps them do that. So we have a few mock-ups, and actually, with the exception of this one, which I did the design of, the teammates who did these visualizations actually made interactive dashboards. So this actually has another piece in reality that you can, so we have these live dashboards that you can actually use. So this was an example of just like making it really simple. What community board are you looking at? What complaint type? What's your date range, and what unit do you want to view by what time, what type of time period? So time series graph would be maybe a line graph that looks like this. This is an example of a geo map that'd be really useful to CEO if you want to compare 311 request data with the type of licenses that exist in the area. Like if you're curious if there's noise complaints where there's on-premises liquor license, this would be an interesting graph to overlay. And here's the agency performance data that we felt would be most useful for the community board. So average response time by agency, and then also by community board. So they can compare, are the issues in another community board, is this issue getting solved more quickly by this agency? It really just empowers them to actually take action with this data. And here's an example. We did some group sketching. What would it look like if we put all these visualizations together? So you could have a geo map of where the requests are coming from, with a list of the top requests, and by selecting one of the requests, you could then get a time series that gives you more detail about how that request type has changed over time. It might be top now, but do you see a trend with what it was in the past? And here's the data category roll-up. 304 complaint types is kind of what we're dealing with in the data set. So the categories that we felt would be most useful are noise, And you can see, I won't read the slide, but housing, illegal parking, traffic signals, street cleanliness, and other. So, and many, many, many others. And these, just based on the topics that we discussed with the community board members, we felt would be most powerful to see and useful to see. Well, that's it. And then the other half is coming up. Oh, yeah. This one or the roll up? Yeah. Sure. Okay, nice.
Give it to him. So why are there so many $100 bills on this slide? The answer to that is that the server hosting that supports BoardStat, were Beta NYC to need to pay for it, would cost $100,000 a year. So that sounds like not a sustainable plan for a tool for community boards to have to depend on the generosity of Microsoft to keep a product like this going. In addition, so I should back up a second. So what my group of the team was working on was exploring the idea of an open source technology stack that could support BoardStat. So sustainability, financial sustainability is certainly a big piece of that. Another piece of that is public use, is that software that is paid for the public should be usable by the public. So this kind of tech being built with open source tools that can then be reused and borrowed and modified by other people, we thought was really important. Our question was, what would it take? How feasible is this? Is this something that we think is possible? In addition to sustainability, something that our group spent a lot of time talking about was ease of use. And really this was kind of across both sides of the group. So something we thought was important was accessibility. We had community board members talking about how many people who would want to use this weren't very tech savvy. So having a powerful tool that lets you drill into, like BoardStat, that lets you drill deeply into a lot of categories is great and really powerful, but speaks more to maybe someone with a little bit of a data background than to maybe an average smartphone user. Something else we talked about was designing for specific use cases. So an example might be if you have a liquor license renewal. Maybe you want to look at noise complaints around a certain area, maybe around a certain time. You want to see if there's a trend compared to the past year. You might also want to look at attendance at meetings by this. Is the owner of this establishment someone who's been participating in the community board process? So there's a handful of kinds of views that would support this process of the license renewal question. So two ways that you can look at building a tool are building it very generally and building it around specific use cases. And something we thought would really help with this ease of use is developing more specific views that serve a particular function. And then important in that is a feedback loop where people who are using the tool can provide input back either to kind of a team of product team of people who are prioritizing work, or for that matter to developers. So a developer can go and hack on it and spend a few hours, add some feature that's needed to address some question. The data that we were focusing on initially was the 311 data. So the workflow would go from 311 to Socrata to this open source BoardStat. And the goal in the future would be to add more data sets. The next sort of hack is that the data is split into these 59 segments for each community boards. At this point, the scope, we don't need to be looking at comparing from district to district, or from board district to district. We're really just building a tool for community boards to use within their own neighborhood. And this is important from a technical perspective because it cuts the data down to a manageable size. Another thing that's important is an analysis layer. Right now, the data that's in BoardStat is very raw, and I know that was part of the goal, was to kind of convey the problems, where are the rough spots in the data. But it would also be, and so cleaning is one kind of transformation which could occur after the fact.
In addition, there are certain kinds of questions that you could, I guess by doing some analysis on the data, by doing some clustering on the data, you could draw certain kind of insights that wouldn't be possible by just sort of doing raw queries on the original data. So the idea of being able to build a scripted analysis layer that could run these queries and push the data back into the data source, and then you could query on the analyzed data, we identified that as a goal. And then public access. So any of the transformed data should be queryable by members of the public. We talked a little bit about what this could look like. So a group, the blue people here, blue smiles, are a mix of people from community boards and technical people who would be making decisions about like feature roadmap for this tool. The green is technical people who are supporting the infrastructure. And then the yellow is this is a team of people who are building features, who are contributing to the infrastructure, and whose work is being reviewed by the green structure. And that feedback loop that I mentioned would kind of feed back into that blue group. We identified some next steps, which is to for Noel to just put the whole thing in his bike. Yeah, seriously though, we would like to do a proof of concept using PostgreSQL and Carto, which is these are both open source tools. Folks from Carto were here today. We'd like to recruit some people for these this blue group and this green group. I'd like to explore questions of communication with other cities. What tools are other cities using, and how could the work that's being done here get leveraged elsewhere? And also, you can join your community board. Also, you can submit 311 complaints, because one thing we heard from community board members is that they actually it's really important to get the record of the 311 call. Gives them a lot more kind of credibility compared to like just saying that someone says something is a problem. Having that record, that kind of paper trail, if you will, is pretty important to them. Thanks.
Another terrific job, so thank you. I'm going to make one quick shameless plug while that slide is up. Definitely submit more 311 complaints. However, please use our 311 online or our newly released updated mobile app, which Magdalene and the Do It team produced. It's far more cost efficient, so since this is budget season, I will plug that. So terrific job. I like the split between both. I'm going to go back for my comments and my question to the first part. And I really like the idea of the dashboard approach as a way of getting more people engaged, in this case, community boards. I'm really a big supporter of that. I think we have a varied level of support or interest across the community board universe. But the easier you can make it, the more relevant you can make it, it's going to be better. It's going to force the city to be more responsive. So the more power of data you can put into people's hands through a dashboard that, as you described, can be used by many, is going to ultimately drive a better outcome. So terrific work in identifying that. I think that's fantastic. From the data perspective, looking at the dashboard, my question is, were there any data elements that people really wanted to see and just don't exist yet, or don't exist today, I should say?
There were a few that came up. Do you guys remember specifically any that?
Like a parade route.
Yes, you do like dynamic context calls. Okay. I would say it is on the 311 data, and then have that go out to the people that would need to see that.
All right, good, helpful. One of the things we're looking at is what more can we pull out? Obviously, we're limited by what we collect. And on an exciting note, when we build the new CRM tool, we will have account management. There's privacy, of course, associated with that. But we will have another layer of intelligence, we believe.
I was going to add that too. That came up that this difficulty that the community board might sometimes have with knowing whether an individual complained about something many times, or if 10 people complained about the same thing. So that's awesome, yeah. But the privacy concern did come up as well. So
Okay, great.
Just another answer to that was kind of countering for use of 311 in general, especially if you're looking at a trend. Kind of if you're seeing this trend go up, is that because there are more calls, or is it because there's more of this activity happening?
Right. Yep. No, good point. And for the users of this, we'd be happy to help unlock some of that, right? So if something went up in January and there was a blizzard, there's intelligence that says that's why it went up. So allowing for that would be plus. So terrific job.
Yes, terrific job. And also, I want to give a shout out to the New York City Department of City Planning for their revamp of the district profiles. It was a really nice job there. In terms of your discussion on the visualization, that's very important, because for a lot of folks who will use this, they may not get into it in terms of the high level of data and tables and all that. And visualization is something that's really, speaks to them. I appreciated the features or innovations that you mentioned around visualization, just not geospatial. People are very interested in what's happening on my block or on my 2-block area. They have very contextual, very deep knowledge of what they see there, but also across time, as you mentioned. And then as a tool for advocacy, what's it benchmarked against? Or, are we better or higher or lower against what? And for decision making and community boards, and for the question of equity and benchmarking, I think that's a nice area to explore that you started mentioning. My only question is, in terms of incorporating aspects of how do you train people on this, or how do you create ways where even within the website, certain questions, or when they hit a certain bottleneck or a certain problem, how can they get some type of training assistance right on the website?
that's an awesome question. Did anyone think of that while we were working? We didn't even get there. I love that. I'm a UX person, so I love that question.
Yeah, I feel like that would be something that, as a user, if you go to this dashboard view, you would, if you want to find out more, you would go to the tool itself, right? The concept, or sorry, the board stat tool itself. And then within that, I would hope that there would be those info bubbles or some way that kind of guide users to in the right direction.
Yeah, to kind of build on that, what we did talk about was how to make that really clear, the linking to the other tools for more detail, and also the possibility of us suggesting data sets that might be related, or other places to go look to answer, if you have a specific question, if there's a way for the user to input a specific question. And I think an example that was brought up was about there was a bad landlord, but the connection couldn't have been drawn between the 311 complaints about the building conditions until someone actually thought of overlaying ownership of the buildings. So we might be able to suggest something like that.
I just also want to say that in addition to community board members, they're supported by community board district staff. They're like agencies themselves, and I know I saw some staff members from community boards, but particular community board 3, Susan Stetzer, is here. If you could please stand up. So these are district managers. They're kind of like agency heads. And for Susan, I know at some point that you feel comfortable if you can also give some feedback. In particular, I know you're just now going through borough budget consultations with city agencies, and I participated in 2 days of those, and not once did 311 data, at least that I'm aware of, specific to the agencies, came up in the documentation or in the questions or anything like that. So at some point, if you can reflect on how might this be incorporated into the borough budget consultations.
Well, I think actually we did use 311 data for the police consultation, and everyone uses the noise complaints as an example because it's so concrete. And we actually did use that and showed the trend of increasing noise complaints as a way to show what the strategy being used by the police was not working, and also by community board to show where more policing of that type was needed. I think we use 311 for a lot of planning, but I think one of the reasons you didn't hear it as much in the consultations is because we were focusing on different funding questions at that time. But just for some feedback, I'd like to connect 3 dots. I've always been a huge fan of 311, which you know, and in working for the community board, we use it every day. It is incredibly invaluable, valuable. I would like to connect the managing expectations to the strategy for the city workers, and then to submit more complaints. When somebody calls and says, I have a noise complaint, and the operator says we have 48 hours to respond, their natural inclination is, why bother? But there are other uses, and people should be made aware of them, which I think would help them submit more complaints. The uses are looking for the chronic complaints so that we can deal with them, looking for trends. There's so many uses, but people are not, that is not explained to people at all when they submit their complaints. And I think it would be I think they need better marketing. You have something really good, you need to market and let the customers who call into 311, let them know how valuable their calls are.
Great. Yeah. Great. All right. Team 2. All right.
Thank you so much.
So now we're going to be up for Team 3. Can I get Team 3's presenters up here? Dun, da, 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 dun, dun, da, 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 da. What? Really? Wow. The composition AIs. All right. Who goes first?
I think schemas first, or do you want to give an overview?
Yeah, there you go.
Hi guys, we were the housing challenge. Our challenge was how can New York City 311 service requests and other open data highlight neighborhood trends and monitor affordable housing for community boards. So we sort of did some whiteboarding and some sticky notes and came up with sort of 3 general buckets of things we were interested in looking at. One was sort of a data schema, one was data visualization, and the third one was sort of data awareness. So we then split into teams, and we had 3 teams, one for each of the topics. So I was on the schema team, that's why I'm talking. The schema team first started to look at what data, both within 311, because I know that was supposed to be our focus, and then also what other kinds of data tell us about sort of the status of affordable housing in a community board or a community district. And so we just sort of brainstormed and wrote down everything we could think of, and we were trying to sort of go from indicators of sort of harassment or displacement, things that prevent people from accessing or actually push them out of affordable housing. So things like bad landlords, harassment, displacement, and then trying to sort of work backwards to, well, what data sets would we need in order to learn something about that, and then sort of what agencies provide those data sets. So then we said, that's way too broad. Let's just look at the 311 data and let's start there. So we sort of came up with a short list of things that we felt were indicative of poor housing quality, which might then also be indicative of sort of housing that was poorly maintained, where tenants were not actually able to be safe and healthy in their homes. So we came up with these. It was the things you would expect: leaks, mold, not having heat or hot water, excessive garbage around the house or around the building, pests, rodents, things like that. And so then we handed this off to the data viz team.
Okay. Hi guys, I'm Danielle. I was part of the data viz section of this team, and kind of taking what the schema team put together, identifying a handful of key indicators from that very large list of possible service requests. We came up with some different visualization ideas. A lot of them have to do with maps. So here is, actually, oh yeah, we can click. Well, we don't need to click on this link, I think. But this one, generally, one of the things we were thinking is that if you complain to 311, it doesn't really make a difference unless your complaint is addressed. So this is looking at average time to close that complaint. You can kind of generally see that Brooklyn is a little bit faster. Queens and Staten Island are much slower. Next, yeah. This is another view. It's looking at the complaints, those kind of complaint groups that we just talked about over time. These two guys are, this one's like heat entire building, and this one's heat just for the apartment. So it's pretty clear that those are like major complaints, and shockingly, there's more heat complaints in the winter. And these, we all made them in Tableau, so I imagine this link will go out afterwards and you can like play and click around and like say you're on one of the community boards, you can select or deselect those boards and see how that specific community board is doing. Kind of going along with the average resolution time, this visual looks again at each circle is a community board in each borough, and the position on the y-axis is again average resolution time. So you can, like we looked at before, Staten Island kind of slow, Brooklyn kind of fast. One thing that's kind of interesting, and I don't necessarily have an explanation, but they all kind of have this shape. So that was just, you know, a fun thing to look at. And this is actually built in Socrata by Jaime. And this one's super duper cool, and I definitely encourage you guys to like spend a lot of time in it, but it looks at kind of overall building quality, kind of think combining a few metrics. So you can, if you want, I think it's actually, is this one an image? Oh no, it's live. So we can put in like this address. And it shows a heat map of overall complaints, but if you want to look at specifically what some of those complaints are, you can do this and see that there's homeless person assistance, noise, just like really explore and get very granular. So this one is super awesome. So yeah, that was kind of what we did on the data viz side, specifically looking at different data sets in 311 that would kind of help inform affordable housing.
Go back to this one for a second. So once the schema team had handed off our sort of housing quality indicators from the 311 data, we said, okay, well, we finished that, so we should now think about sort of affordable housing more broadly, which, you know, for everyone who dug into the 311 data, this is so weird, it's like reflecting back. For everyone who dug into the 311 data, like there's only so much you can learn from quality complaints about sort of the status of affordable housing in your neighborhood. So we started to think about, well, what other data sets would you need to pull in an ideal future state in order to be able to get a better sense of like where the affordable housing is in your neighborhood. So we understand that right now there is no sort of publicly available unified data set where you can understand where all of the affordable housing is in your neighborhood. But we think by doing some work to combine Pluto, Core Data NYC, which is run by the Furman Center, includes all of the subsidized housing across the city, and then Tax Bills NYC includes it includes all the subsidized, but also non-subsidized rent-stabilized units. And so between the three of those, if you could mash them up, then you would really have this great data set of all of the affordable housing in New York City. We also came up with a set of recommendations to improve open data related to affordable housing more broadly, going beyond just 311 data, but it was way too much to include, so it looked a little bit like that.
Lots of words.
Yeah.
So one of the things we spent a great deal of time as well was civic engagement. We want people to be able to easily use this data and to better visualize it. In some cases, it might mean putting more media on it in terms of photos, some AV stuff, and also in terms of the documentation, the heavy documentation and planning. It would be helpful for that to be indexed somehow, to be consolidated instead of parsing through 200 pages of technical data. So again, this was some of the areas we talked about, and again, it reflects marketing and empowering our residents and empowering our citizenry to greatly use the tools that are readily available, that are ever growing. So that was the broad list of wish lists that we have, and as a community board member, I can tell you that people attempt to use systems like this, and we somehow get blamed when it doesn't work. So any improvements in terms of the response time, both from 311 and the agency, does help. We are concerned that agencies do respond better. I sort of made the recommendation in terms of these maps that the ED, or the election districts, or the assembly districts, and the senatorial districts be overlaid as well, to get greater accountability for the people the people you put in office. That allows them and any of their town meetings, since we have smartphones, to pull all this data and say, in the terms of a trend, let's say 2 or 3 years, what have you done for me? So I believe that's kind of the goal that we should be looking for in terms of civic engagement. And just one other special thing, if I may. The geospatial updates for the maps that you use, someone should begin looking at them a little carefully, because there are a lot of demapped properties. We're building and changing the city rather rapidly, and those maps don't reflect what's out there in terms of real time.
Great job.
Well, again, another terrific job. I'm really tied into this because it's very topical for my team, some of the folks in the Mayor's Office of Operations and other groups in the city. We're really looking at something that you are focusing on as well. For us, it's a question of, is there equity or inequality in terms of using 311 and across the city? And you've mentioned one data set, Furman data, which is something we do use to look at especially income level, poverty level, and then community district level is the easiest way to map that data and then get down to a level that you can start to look at. And the age-old question that we get is, is one community over-indexing, is another one under-indexing, and why? So I was very interested in the thought process and the data that you pulled together to look at what I'll call agency fulfillment of the service request, of the complaint, right? So you were taking a look at that. Any thoughts on that, or any additional commentary on that in terms of, why you focused on how the amount of time it takes an agency to close as a key indicator?
So part of it was not just necessarily time to close, but like if it's being closed at all. And one issue that we ran into was, I think someone else can maybe talk about this more specifically, but the way I believe it's tracked in 311, it gets passed to another agency, and there's not a really clear connection in the data set to follow it through that process, which would be cool to have. So we did look at it, but also knowing that it's not truly complete.
All right, good, no, helpful, and I'm one of the people who will definitely be diving into that data. As I said, this one's near and dear to me. I have a personal mission this year to be on the ground in every community district across the city to see what it's like out there, and then to see how the data then plays back in is fantastic. And it's really where we're going to be going next in terms of evaluating how does 311 reach people. To go back to what Susan said before, we've got a good product. Some places we have to market it a little bit better. So my hat's off to you, great job.
And also, looking at the closed data, we here at the community board get complaints that they never showed up, or they closed the data. What am I going to do? So there is no ability for the citizenry to talk to the agency themselves directly, and sometimes we can't even do that. So I think there has to be a better interactive system available to do that, so to lessen the fidelity of this entire process.
I think you said that very well. I appreciate that. I agree with you. And if process doesn't do it, technology will, and that's what we're going to be counting on. So again, great job.
Yeah, I want to echo that as well. Great job on a very important, probably, you know, the affordability crisis in New York City is probably on everybody's radar. It's just one of the things that I know even for the mayoral administration, with the 200,000, 120,000 preserved affordable units, and then the creation of 80,000 new affordable units, you know, in terms of the aspirational goal. But I want to also, in terms of the agency completion or close or response, this is where for constituents or residents or people who call elected officials offices, you know, language is very important. So when you mention closed, or at some point you also mentioned resolution, that has a very different definition for the agency as for the person who actually needs the solution or the resolution. And I hearken to the system that NYCHA has, and none of this data is NYCHA, so it doesn't even, you know, our largest public housing or the biggest, you know, the size of Atlanta is missing. So Atlanta's missing here. But you know, when we have forums with NYCHA, we always hear that they'll put a ticket for, like, let's say, you know, we have mold in our apartment, and then the ticket will be closed, and when they ask, they say, oh yeah, we sent someone up and they looked, and then, oh yeah, that's mold. And then you need another ticket in order to have something else. Like, so it's, you know, so I think that unpacking the resolution or the closed or the resolved part of how agencies understand their work is very important for even the accountability, but also the legitimacy of this service in the long term, in the long run. And I think that's very important for us to keep in mind.
Just going to say one other thing.
We're at time. We're going to be
It's
well
kind of
30
important,
minutes.
and that is language, since you mentioned it. We live in a very bilingual community, and I notice most of this data is in American English. It would be helpful if someone would try to develop either site, website to address that, because that's part of what we have to do in our community as well. And some of the words mean a little different, as you say, versus another. So that's something that perhaps we can begin looking at as well in our 311 complaints.
Great. All right. Slides. I've been told by the organizing team that I'm a very bad MC, because it's 6 o'clock now and we need to run through the last two presenters. So I'm going to have you two run through this, and then we're going to run through the next one, and then we'll do collective commentary.
All right, I'll try to keep it brief. So our team was focused on the impact of weather and special events and how they impact the volume of service requests. How does this work? All right. So we explored quite a few things. I think we'll just see them as they come. So in the interest of time, we'll just breeze through this. So straight away, we can see we just wanted to get a baseline feel for what 311 service request volume looks like. So can you see the mouse up there? Yeah. All right. So over time, you can see this is great. More and more people calling 311 in general. Over the day of the year, we see that there are generally more complaints near the tail end of the year and in the kind of middle point of the year. It looks like it aligns generally with peak summer, peak winter. So I think the temperature definitely plays a big part in what's going on here. By day of the week, we can see there's something pretty clear going on here. During the working days, lots more complaints and service requests coming in. So based on some of these basic seasonal patterns that we were seeing and a few other attributes about the weather conditions in that point in time, we were able to very quickly fit a model that explained quite a bit of the variation in how much variation there is in service requests. So we can see here we tried a couple of different approaches. So just throwing a few features in there like day of the week, day of the year, temperature, rainfall, snowfall, a few other attributes of the weather. We were able to very quickly fit a model that predicted 80% of the variation in 301 service requests. So we can see with just a couple of pieces of information, we very rapidly can plan for the future and say, hey, if the temperature and the weather looks like this tomorrow, we better have this many inspectors ready to go. Future possibilities, we threw this together in a couple of hours. A few developers with a couple of days or a couple of weeks could put together something even more robust. So we just want to go through, drill down a little bit, explore some of these really key relationships. We saw already that temperature is very, very useful. So here we can see if you plot out, this is plotting out 311 requests and temperature on the same chart. So we can see as temperature goes up, 311 requests go up a little bit. As temperature drops down, 311 requests again jump up, with the coldness definitely playing a bigger part here. So we know when there's extreme heat, extreme cold, we better get ready for some service requests. We can also see over here, it's pretty much the same story. This distribution is fairly bimodal in that the greatest volume of 311 requests come in when it's very hot around here or when it's very cold. Obviously, there's less here because there's just few days of the year where the temperature reaches such extremes. Too fast, too slow? Just right? Just right, all right. All right, drilling deeper into certain specific kinds of service requests. Here we're looking specifically at heating and hot water. We were able to, again, fit a model explaining 80% of the variation just by seeing how temperature relates to heating and hot water complaints. We can see when it gets cold, people start complaining about heating and hot water. Not surprising, makes a lot of sense. We can see that rodent complaints are very predictable. This is explaining 95% of the variation, which is very interesting. As the hotter it gets, the more rodent complaints there are. I guess it's an open question. Is it because the rats are coming out or because people are coming out or both, or the rats are getting angsty or the people are getting angsty? Maybe all of those things, but as things get hotter, we can certainly expect more rodent complaints. Here's taking a sample, very, very hot day. This is the hottest day of the year in 2010. We can see the, noise complaints are pretty much always make up the greatest proportion of 311 complaints. But blocked driveways and illegal parking is, I think, a little bit not as frequent, so this is a little bit unusual. So I don't know, maybe people get a little bit angry with their neighbors more easily when it's really hot out. Or they want to get in that AC in their car and they can't go anywhere. Damaged trees, dead tree complaints versus wind speed. This is pretty much a natural relation that you wanted to look into. We can see a fairly clear correlation as soon as you get these high wind speeds, these extreme weather events. 311 complaints go through the roof on those specific complaint types, so aligns with our intuition. And here we're looking a little bit deeper into the trees again. We can again see that the greatest number of tree complaints happen to be in the areas where there are the greatest number of trees. Makes sense, nice sanity check. The data is right, at least, we know that much. So this is interesting. We wanted to look at how long does it take for a 311 service request to close on average based on distance since an extreme weather event just happened. So day 0 here that's the day that an extreme weather event happened, and how long does it take those complaints to close. So in aggregate, this relationship was a little bit negative, which makes sense. The closer you are to a day where something really bad happened, the longer it takes that complaint to resolve. But it wasn't as dramatic as we thought it would be. If you look at the y-axis over here, there's not a lot of spread there. It ranges between 1.2 or around 1 around here and 2 around here. So generally, agencies get the job done even when there's been some extreme event. But naturally, we want to see these kinds of events impact different agencies in very different fashions. So we broke this out by agency. This is very small, I know, so I'll read this to you. This says DEP is in red. This is DOT. This is Disney, HPD, and NYPD at the bottom in pink or purple. So most of them are fairly flat, but we see that Disney is impacted the most by these severe weather events. They're the green line right here. So when there's a severe weather event, they have the hardest time catching up to what's going on. Disney's sanitation, I believe. NYPD, very interesting, perfectly flat line. They're tremendous, apparently. maybe they, as soon as a complaint comes in, they hop in the car, turn on the sirens, jump out of the car, shoot the rodent in the face, get out, and problem solved. Or maybe more likely there's some procedural differences in how different agencies treat their 301 complaints. So I'll turn it over to Mattia here, who actually built a predictive modeling tool, which we can hand off to the city agencies to utilize on their own.
So yeah, you can play with the notebook in the link up there, and basically you can select a type of complaint, and in the future we could also filter by borough or whatever you want. For instance, here on the left you see, on your left and my right, you can see the seasonality of heating. Also, we reached the shocking conclusion that there's more heating complaints in winter. And so then the notebook will fit a couple of models based on weather, day of week, day of year, and other moving averages to basically predict the volume of service requests. And of course, this in the future can be expanded into with events, different treatment for storms, etc. And we get out some outputs like the prediction, for instance, here for illegal parking, where we do a very good job, even though we are not very good at finding the days with the most extreme number of requests. But yeah, everything can be improved, obviously.
That's all we got. This is the team. It's our lovely team photo. Yeah, feel free to ask any questions.
All right. Team 5, just hang over there while we do teams. Wait, how much do we have? How far behind are we? Oh, yeah, okay.
So our challenge was to think about how we can address the issue of data bias in 311 data. So everybody's talking here about how we can use this data, how much can we use this data, let's do all these great things with this data, but how do we make sure that we're not just providing services to the people who are complaining, but not to the people who are not complaining, but might have the same issue, right? And there's so many factors in why somebody will participate in 311 or will submit a service request, and we want to make sure that that's valid, right, and reasonable, reliable. So we tackled this through a few different ways of starting to think about how to measure bias, and one of those main ways was to think about what other data sets exist that are a little bit more comprehensive or more valid that we could compare these 311 requests to. And of course, any data set is not perfect, right? Even census data is a survey. Even inspection data depends on what day you happen to inspect. But something that people started to look at in our group was lead and asbestos, because those things do have violations also, not just service requests. So this is a map of the asbestos 311 requests, and what they were thinking about pegging it to was the age of the buildings, right? And so you can see in this map that the asbestos requests are existing in the places with the old buildings, as you would expect, so that's always a good thing. And then another next step would be to look at it more specifically with the ages of the buildings within some of those community districts and see if there's some places where people might be likely to have asbestos but aren't reporting. Another piece that people were looking at was at traffic and trying to see how you could peg 311 road condition reports to other DOT data on traffic and on road usage and road repairs. They didn't get super far on that one, but there's a lot of potential. A lot of these are sort of like just skimming the top, right? A lot of ideas, but didn't take a lot more work and thought to build them together. So this was an idea of trying to compare internally in the 311 data different types of requests and whether people are perhaps only making the requests that are the most severe, right? So if you do not have heat in your house, like you're gonna be making heat requests and maybe not making requests for a new street tree. But if you're like all your basic needs are met, then perhaps you're making these sort of more like quality of life type of requests. And so sort of basing off the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so the idea here was to put the request into sort of seriousness, level of like real impact on your day-to-day life. And of course, this was sort of just a pick of some of them. And you could debate till the cows come home which ones should go in what categories. But this was the ones that they picked, and then split up all of the service requests into those categories. And this is just the first step of throwing it on a map. You would need to then sort of quantify it into categories or look at it more as a heat map. But if you zoom in a little bit, you can see already some like kind of interesting things in that. So these green ones are more lower level, quote unquote, lower level ones, and you're seeing more of those in Manhattan here, lower Manhattan, whereas it looks like there's kind of fewer of them in Brooklyn, but that's just an untrained eye. And then just like reiterating that we think it's really important to consider the data in context when making decisions and continuing to build models with it, and thinking about these things like, are we seeing an increase because it's actually increasing or because more people are reporting? And are we seeing that this thing is different here because it actually is different or just because people are not reporting it?
Don't go anywhere. We got one more. We're going to do all the questions, all three of them. MMR performance. So let's see here. Take a seat. There we go. 2 people. 2 microphones.
We're going to just switch off. Sure.
Wait. 2 microphones, 1 works.
Okay. Woo. How you guys doing? Bring it home. Let's do it. Ready? Go. So our group, our fantastic group, was looking into the problems of something called the Mayor's Management Report. And if you haven't heard of it, it is super cool. The Mayor's Management Report is a public account of how city agencies are performing. It's published every single year. It has been published for 40 years. It is a beast. It takes 44 agencies and offices. It looks at 1,700 performance indicators. It spans 472 pages. It's a PDF. And so what we're looking at is how we can take 311 data and actually inform and improve agency performance by combining it with the MRR report, NMR report. So we did that 3 ways. First, we looked for relationships between 311 and MMR data. Second one, we introduced some demographic and geographic data to highlight maybe inequity issues. And then lastly, we looked into predicting MMR indicators, so basically trying to predict how agencies would perform in the future. So the first opportunity we had was to find relationships between 311 data and MMR data. And as you can see, almost all of the 311 sort of data points come in 10 specific agencies. So there are these agencies that are really well represented by 311 data, and they're good candidates for sort of understanding how they perform. There are some that are not very well represented by the 311 data, so we have to kind of be careful about how we apply it. So that's 93% of all of the 311 records sort of cover 10 agencies. 66% of those have like a nice connection to an MMR report, so an agency that's reporting out their progress every year. And 20% of the sort of data points that the MMR uses kind of are tied back to 311. So this is sort of our opportunity of combining the 2 data sets. So for instance, you have heat and hot water complaints in the 311 data get actually reflected in the MMR, and these agencies are actually using this to say, here's how we're doing this year. Noise complaints, water leaks, and these are sort of opportunities to sort of highlight the way that 311 data actually gets brought into the MMR. And as you'd expect, there are some overall trends in the 311 data. Like for instance, in 2017, the heat and hot water time to close went down. So they were doing a good job. And that agency reported, that they were actually seeing a 7% decrease in their time to close heating requests overall. So that's really great. However, the opportunity the 311 data actually represents is we can look into where that information is coming from. And if you look at the 311 data, you see that the Bronx requests are actually getting worse. So while that agency is doing really well overall, and they report that out in the MMR, they're not doing well everywhere. So we'll get to that in a second. But there's also this problem with occasionally the 311 sort of classification for how they're closing requests. For instance, this is an average of how long it takes them to close requests, and then how they're actually reported out in the MMR are different. So these red dots represent how the MMR is reporting that they've closed these requests. So they sort of oftentimes report that it's taken longer than the 311 data reports. So there's some differences there that we have to watch out for. But overall, there's this really great opportunity to provide an interactive way for people to explore the 311 data and how it intersects with MMR data. So right now, that static PDF, that 450-page PDF, we can actually modernize that and bring in the 311 data and allow people to kind of explore how that's related. For instance, you can't see it very well, but we looked at how the people who go back to the emergency room more than one time for asthma has sort of changed over the years. So the percentage of people who go back to the emergency room. And then we compared that to 311 complaints about air quality. And so you can see that like the complaints about air quality actually went down fiscal year 2017, but the people who went back to the emergency room went up. So that tells you a lot about how this agency is actually responding to the changing demands of the population, and tells a little bit more of a story. So I'm going to hand off the mic to explain the opportunity to introduce additional data sources.
Okay, so we wanted to see, as you've been explaining, if we could use 311 data and MMR data to supplement each other, validate each other, and also potentially highlight new information. And one thing our subgroup worked on is whether we could highlight any disparity by using some spatial tools, since the MMR is citywide and 311 has more granular spatial information. We started this process by looking at which agencies were getting the bulk of 311 calls, and then from there we went back and looked at the MMR indicators and tried to pick indicators of interest, kind of like how you were showing. We were attempting to sort of crosswalk between 311 complaints and the MMR indicators. So for example, I looked at one of the MMR indicators for the Department of Health is the percentage of adults who are smokers, and there are also a lot of 311 calls that are related to secondhand smoke. So that was something that we wanted to look into. So we produced some maps. These rely on the 311 data, since MMR is citywide, but there's like a lot of next steps that could happen after these, so we just wanted to kind of demonstrate what's possible. So this is dirty sidewalks complaints. It's like a heat map. So you can see that in the darker areas, there were higher concentrations of requests related to dirty sidewalks. And potentially, I guess it would be like sanitation and maybe even city planning that would be interested in something like this. Just a little more detail on the smoking related call, I guess, because that's the one that I worked on. The DOH did report decreases in % of adults smoking. There were 15,000 records related to smoking in the 311 data, so I was looking specifically at those data. A lot of people obviously have hit on the idea of like how long it takes to close a call as being really important. So these complaints took from less than a day to up to 47 days, and a lot of them are like secondhand smoke related. If we can observe a difference in response times spatially, and we can see areas that may need increased attention to smoking cessation, This can also be linked up to like census data and give demographic information. So maybe it would, give more info on whether certain like poverty groups need more attention or not. And this information could then be valuable to DOH or other agencies that work to target smoking cessation. So here's a map that pertains to the response time to smoking complaints. And like, I just almost want you to ignore the legend altogether, because as we all know, like working with dates can be difficult, so it was kind of a scramble toward the end. The numbers are not real, but this is just like a demonstration of the difference in response times to these smoking-related complaints.
Cool. Almost there, almost there. We're gonna do this. Last one. So lastly, we looked at ways in which we could actually predict agency performance based on past performance and including some of the 311 data set. So first we started to build up a model of how all of these different factors combine and influence each other so that we could understand how small changes and things like housing prices could actually influence the number of 311 calls that we get. This is a really great sort of force diagram that was built by Harlan and a member from another team. So we did a little cross-team collaboration. And then another member of our team actually spent like the first hour of the day building a predictive model of agency performance over time. So this is one of the things that goes into that report. One of those performance indicators is the average child protective specialist caseload. And they have that up, for the past 5 years. And with sort of taking just one additional measurement, so increasing the time of reporting from once a year to twice a year, we can actually build a pretty substantial model of how that will move in the future. So this model is for the next, 2 years, and it sort of puts it in a sort of two case range and does a really good job of that. And there's a link to that model on the GitHub, so that can also go out to the agency. So I want to say huge thanks to our awesome team, and especially to the 3 people that we worked with from the mayor's office. Y'all are super helpful. Thank you very much.
All right. Can I ask 5 minutes worth of questions? Is that okay? Yeah, something like that? Okay. So I'm going to get all the teams to come back up here, and then you guys get to share the microphone. All right. Here you go. You ready? You got some comments interesting? No?
Okay.
This is for the live stream. There we go.
So I don't want to be that guy that's between us and alcohol or whatever else is next. So, but I don't want to short shrift the work that each of the 3 teams did. Fantastic work. I'm not going to ask any questions here. I have probably 600 questions to ask outside of here. A lot of what you're doing is really what we need from a citywide perspective. The predictive focus, the commonality between them is we have data, we have information, we're serving the public, but how do we do that better? And I think each of those 3 areas that you focused on really zoned in on that. And that's where I'll say, certainly from a 301 perspective, I'll go out a little bit further and say from a city perspective, that's where this type of work is very, very helpful to us, because we don't do that in our day-to-day. A few city agencies focus on that, but in total, we don't do that. And there are opportunities. There are opportunities out there to reach that, hierarchy of needs where it's real important for someone. And why aren't they calling? Why aren't they reporting asbestos? Why do people in this neighborhood report asbestos regularly and lead? And why does this neighborhood not do that? And how do we reach those neighborhoods to make them understand that it's safe, it's okay, it's private, you can report lead? These are things that we're passionate about, and these are the types of tools that are going to help us citywide as city employees break down some of those barriers. So I'm thrilled with the work that you did, and I'm really excited about it. And I could ask 1,000 questions, but I won't in the interest of time.
Yeah, no, I want to echo it. Amazing presentations. I wish in my official capacity I could confer PhDs on people or something. It was pretty, you were able to work in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Anytime you could work that in a day's, that's pretty good. The 79, 80% correlation coefficient with weather, that was pretty shocking for me that it was up there like that. That's pretty amazing. And ending it with the mayor's management report, it's a good ending, I think, in terms of the presentations. Anytime we can push this from when I mentioned the hindsight, which is just the complaint driven, to the oversight, which is the accountability, but then the three presenters up here really are working in that last bucket of foresight and predictability and really pushing the envelope in that regard. So, I mean, it was amazing. Thank you.
Great. All right. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate sticking to the end. Please, please, please look around you, clean up after yourself, clean up after your neighbor. Is there food? There's some food that's over here. Please feel free to take that as your way out. We are going to be recycling the name badges, so if you don't want to keep that next to your mirror at home, we'll gladly take that so that way we can use it for the next event. We're going to try to do a write-up of this event within the next week, so expect to see something maybe a week and a half from now. This Wednesday, you'll, for those of you who are subscribed to the message, we'll get an announcement about the Open Data 2.0 law and the People's Roadmap. And so thank you for staying. I really appreciate all these insights and look forward to having and continuing this discussion online. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, thanks so much.